Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to this talk. Today we'll be talking about Bexy's story and how, they leverage their cross-border relationships to run its remote operations. We're lucky enough to have Cuco Vega here, the co-founder and CTO of Bexy. Very impressive gentleman. We'll introduce him in a little bit more in just a second. I'm Francisco. I am the founder and CEO of Unidos, a financial technology company here in New York City. I'm also the executive director of data science at understood.org. I spent about 10 years of my career working at major financial institutions in the quantitative and data science space, for places like AIG, the Commonwealth Bank, and Goldman Sachs. Thank you, everyone, and for coming today, for sharing a little bit of time with us, and thank you for Techqueria for allowing us to host and be a part of this, and for creating this really, really incredible community. And yeah, please, Cuco, please introduce yourself and your extraordinary background.
Cool. Thank you so much, Francisco. Well, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be as impressive as a lot of people here, but here it goes. So like I was telling Francisco, I was born in the Bay, Area, but then my parents and I moved to Mexico, so that's where I grew up, right? I went to college in Guadalajara and then moved to the Bay 12 years ago, right? And when I came here, I pretty much started working first actually in a pretty big biotech company, Bio-Rad, right? Which is where I kind of started switching my career from engineering more towards design, right? So little by little, so from there, I started, working just at different startups, right? While I was also doing grad school. So that's how my interest in how to both use design and technology together kind of started, right? So then the last company where I worked for, right, Citrix, that's where my co-founder Rafa and I decided to start our company Bexy, right? And that's pretty much the how everything began.
Well, thank you so much for that, Cuco. Bexy is a wonderful organization. I invite everybody to take a look at it, and they do some really great work. It'd be wonderful if you could share the link to it to other folks. They might have interest in learning more about it. I think that could be helpful. We'll probably structure this conversation for the folks that are on the call watching, very dynamically. So if you have questions, if you'd like to participate, as Kat laid out, please feel free to chime in. We'd love to have you and have a very engaging conversation. But as a starting point, I'll kick it off to you, Cuco, to share a little bit about Bexy's story and some of the other details. I think you had some material prepared, and we'd love to see it.
Yeah, I pretty much, that kind of represents what we are as a company, right? So here it goes. All right. So first of all, my name and my email, right? If any of you would like to, get in touch, keep the discussion going. If we can, help you, with some tips or insights on, how we've been, running our company and our cross-border operation, right? Then we would definitely love to do it, right? So pretty much Bexy is a Latino founded and cross-border company, and we call it cross-border because we pretty much, the whole story, starting from the founders, right? We're both Mexican American, right? We both, even from, our families are from the same state in Mexico and everything, but it's very, very interesting because we're cross-border in a lot of things, right? We're cross-border when it comes to physically the locations, right? We have we have our first office obviously in the Bay Area, but then we have now 2 offices in Mexico, right? And it's very interesting because I was talking to Francisco about this earlier. Something that's very interesting about the way that we started the company is, yes, we were very interesting on creating a company that would help small businesses, be able to get the same quality of design, marketing, and sales services, right? So they could grow their businesses, right? But we realized that just by doing it ourselves, right, the traditional way, when we started with an agency, right? We started with a digital agency, and we noticed that it was not going to be feasible, right? And to leverage technology and our experience, right, to create a tool that would allow people to just, with very little budget and without knowing anything about design, code, or marketing, they could create and launch their own marketing themselves, right? So pretty much we started in 2016, right? Leaving both, we both left Citrix, which is the company where we were working at the time, to start this. And we realized obviously that at least in the meantime, while we were working, creating our product, we were not going to be able to generate any revenue, right? So for us, it was key to find a way to both self-sustain ourselves, right? And at the same time, start working on creating this product, right? So we started working, the very first employee was actually my brother, right? So he was in Guadalajara, and he was pretty much a project manager, right? So both Rafa and I would be, designing, coding, whatever needed to be done, right? And then my brother was in charge of everything, right? Client facing, project management, all this stuff, right? And then from there, when we were finally ready to start, working on the product, right? Then we hired one of my best friends from college, right? Who's a great engineer, right? But he wasn't in, he wasn't in the Bay, he wasn't in Guadalajara. He was actually living in La Paz, Baja California Sur, right? Which is super close. It's like an hour and a half from Cabo, right? But it's definitely a place where you would never think that you would find an engineer, right? Since this guy went to college with me in Guadalajara, then I trusted him and I knew he was really good. So we started that way, right? And then we started, getting more clients and more clients to the point where we had to hire more people. So what we did is around the same time, I was collaborating on this project with the government of Jalisco in Mexico, right? Guadalajara, the capital of that state, is pretty much the main tech hub in Mexico right now, right? Since the early 70s, all the big companies from Silicon Valley moved there, right? And have had operations there since, right? But now what I started discovering, right, when I started collaborating on this project with the government to help startups come to the Bay Area, right? I realized that now it was not just the companies, but it was also a lot of small startups that were starting to pop up, right? And a lot of local technology that was being developed there, right? So for us, it just made a lot of sense, right? That we could expand our network and kind of leverage our network in both to make the best of what we needed, right? So what we need is we kind of plan a strategy where we were going to define what kind of roles we're going to have in Guadalajara and what kind of roles we need to have in the Bay Area, right? Or at least in the US, right, with us. So we realized that obviously everything that was client focused and business development and project management, we needed people to be here, right? And we needed people to be, to have a lot of experience working with clients in the US and all this, right? But it was very interesting because when we opened our first office 2 years ago in Guadalajara, we actually realized that we also found talent there that had already experience working for US companies, right? Not only working remotely for US companies here, some of them that have been in the US working for tech companies and then moved back, right? So then we built our first team, right? And obviously we started facing a lot of things that we didn't know, right? So number one, obviously, to run an operation in Mexico, there's all these things that we had no idea, right? You know what? I don't think we need this more. I'm just gonna make this a conversation, right? So we found out that obviously there's a lot of differences, and a lot of those differences have to do. Some of them are, literally cultural differences, right? Like the way the people work, the time, right? The hours, right? The hours there to go eat, for example, right? um, and a few other things, right? So obviously, we knew that we didn't want to have a duplicated operation, right? Where we had to deal with taxation in the US, taxation in Mexico, right? So we try to find a way so we could kind of work around, right? And at the very beginning, it was easier because the first people that we hired were more like contractors and freelancers, right? But then it got to the point where, say, if we really wanted to have good talent, then we were competing in Guadalajara with companies like Intel, IBM, HP, Oracle, right? And some bigger startups, right? Or new startups that have actually moved there lately from the Bay Area and from other parts in the US, right? So we realized that we had to pretty much focus on other stuff, right? We had to work on better benefits. We had to work on having an actual office space, right? Because at the beginning, it was very easy to just go like once a month or every 2 months and meet with them in person, right? But then we started working on finding a space and everything that had to do with it, right? Looking for a place where people would be interested in in going to work, right? And a neighborhood where young people mostly, right, would be happy to work at, right? So it took a little bit, but we find the right spot. And then we started, everything was perfect, right? The moment that we had our office, everything was running, right? But then we faced another challenge, right? Because at that point, we had only needed a couple of engineers, and the rest of the team was mostly designers, the marketers, project managers, right? And then we realized that we needed more engineers, right? But just like anywhere else in the world, even there, it's very competitive to get engineers, right? This is something that it's just like everybody already knows, right? Wait, I think some people. Wait, I'm just looking at the chat. I'm sorry, I had not looked at the. I think there are questions.
So yeah, we have some questions. We'll start to surface them. Please feel free to finish your thought, and then I'll surface them to you.
Yeah. So let me just finish saying this, and then I'll go right to answer questions. I'm sorry. So pretty much we realized that we were competing also, with salaries with all the companies that I mentioned before, and it got to the point where it was not that easy for us to compete, right? So talking to my lead engineer, right? He tells me that he knows this kid who's really good in La Paz and that he has worked with him and everything. And I was like, you know what? We don't want to really have, like people all over the place. I would rather have somebody in Guadalajara with our team, right? But he was very insistent. So we hired this guy and he ended up being really good. And then we needed someone else. And then he recommended a friend of him and he was great. So then I'm like, wait, there's a little pattern here, right? So then pretty much we started exploring this other place, right, which was La Paz. And we realized there was a huge opportunity because there are a couple of universities graduating, computer science engineers, but there was no industry at all, no tech companies, only a couple of like almost sweatshops for front-end development. There are companies based in the US and they pay them like extremely low, right? So maybe we can go to questions and then I can continue. Or
yeah, German, if you'd like, you could join us for a video for a call for a question to voice your question, or we can just read it here. You know, I think to read it to the audience, I'll say German has a telemedicine startup, 200% in Spanish, that connects Hispanic community with doctors all over the world, meeting the linguistics and cultural needs. And they're currently hosting. Oh, look at that! He's going to join us, so we'll add him here.
Awesome.
German, please feel free to share your question with the audience.
Yeah, what's going on, guys? Thank you so much for having me here. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay.
German, tell us where you're located.
Sure. Yeah, I live in Tucson, Arizona.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So, thanks. So, yeah, you know what? I love the topic, building an international remote startup. So here's the deal. So, I created a telemedicine marketplace, 100% in Spanish, that allows our community to consult doctors all over the world. And what happened is that due to COVID, we decided to say, let's just do this right away to help our community. And now we are hosting transactions or interactions with doctors in 4 different countries: Mexico, Colombia, Panama, and Argentina, and here in the US. We follow the same business model as Uber. So we collect a commission-based, we collect a commission per transaction on every single transaction that happened through our marketplace. So we collect, in different countries, we collect a percentage, 20%, 35%, and that's how we make money, and something else, and many other ways. But I guess the question is, we are actually hosting operations in Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, Panama, and I know it's gonna go above and beyond these countries, but we are only incorporated here in the US. So I'm like, what in the world? So what is going on? So what do you guys?
So the way that we do it is like this. Obviously, since you got to think of how your company is going to grow and what the structure and the future of your company is going to be, right? We always had it very clear that we're going to be that at some point we were going to be raising capital, for example, right? So your company has to be incorporated in a certain way, in a certain state, right? So for example, we are a Delaware C Corp, right? Doing business in California now. So there's a few things. There's a few options that you can do, right? So number one, like Jolene says on the chat, you definitely need a good cross-border CPA. But there are different options, right? So if you're just starting, like us, when we first started, what we did is we found a staffing agency in Mexico that would pretty much help us cover everything that we needed for our employees, right? So cover like the benefits, insurance, like everything that we wanted to offer them, right? To keep them happy. And we could pretty much do it through them, right? So at that point, we didn't even have to be incorporated in Mexico or anything, right? So pretty much we're an American company and we're sending direct transactions to this company's account in Mexico, right? And then they would take care of everything, pretty much, right? But obviously, when you become a bigger company, right? And then when you start, let's say, if you're raising money and you're starting to get to your Series A, for example, right? Then your investors and they're gonna be doing a little more in-depth due diligence, right? And they're gonna wanna make sure that all these people actually work for you, right? And that they're not just like through third-party companies or whatever, right? And also, depending on what country, some laws are not very happy with this type of companies, right? Staffing agencies, because some of them have like their own ways of kind of saving money, right? And not paying the full amount of taxes to the government, right? So let's say they will not report earnings as earnings, but they will report it as, I don't know, bonus or whatever that is taxed in a different way, right? So anyway, we right now are actually in process of incorporating in Mexico, more like to run our whole operation now in Mexico too, right? So what we did is first we incorporated over there, right? There's a specific type of company that you have to be, right? Which is pretty much the equivalent of an LLC, right? It's called Sociedad de Responsabilidad Limitada. And then what happens is the American company, you set it so that the American company owns the Mexican company, right? So the Mexican company just becomes a subsidiary, right? And then every money that you send from the American company, from this account to the Mexican account, right? It's not going to be taxated, right? Because it's pretty much one company having operations here, right? So we are right now working on kind of migrating towards that model, right? Because we're also already planning our next round for next year, right? But what I always recommend for friends and other colleagues that are just starting is just try to do whatever's easier and whatever's cheaper, right? Obviously.
Yeah. So Cuco, German, thank you so much for your question. We hope it was helpful. We have a couple other questions we want to get to as well, but thank you so much for your thoughtful question and the discussion here. We really appreciate it. So there's another question, which is, do you have to be a Mexican citizen to open up an office in Mexico? And does it save you money?
To open an office, no. To incorporate, at least one partner has to be Mexican, right? So like in this case, right? I mean, technically both Rafa or myself could have been, the Mexican partner, right? But right now I am the partner in charge, right? In Mexico, the Mexican partner, right? So yeah, you do need, in order to incorporate, you need at least one of the founders to be Mexican.
Right. So, Cuco, you've talked to us a lot about, your experience with Brexy, some of the logistics about managing, international business, and it sounds like you guys are doing great. So that's awesome to hear. Could you tell us a little bit about, actually, and one more piece of context, right? You've talked a little bit about some of the network effects that got you some of your early hiring, right? Which is to say that, you knew somebody in La Paz, and then that person knew somebody, and that kind of helped build out your small team to start. But as you started to grow and expand, you mentioned some strategies about using universities. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the interview process that you're using to screen these folks, to engage these folks, to support these folks, so that you have a company that scales and engages people the right way?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, before even we start the process of interviewing, right? The first thing that we need is to define when we need a new person on our team. Then we define if that person, number one, has to be in the U.S. or not, because all of our clients are in the U.S., right? So obviously everything that's client facing, right, has to be like very, very. They have to obviously speak perfect English, right? You have to right? So, or at least, understand not just the, but also a little bit of the culture, right? So you can manage better. And once we define if it's going to, what we normally use is we have different ways of finding depending. So for engineers, for example, in Mexico, we use pretty much LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn in Mexico is just now as mainstream as it is in the US, right? So we use LinkedIn a lot for that. For designers, we use the platforms where designers are normally posting their stuff, right? So Behance, Dribbble, and then for other roles so for marketers, we also use LinkedIn, but then for more senior roles like project managers or like directors, we've actually worked with this company called Empleos TI, which actually I just saw that Emmanuel, the CEO, just was on a talk right before this one.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, they're really, really good, and they're about to start working in the US now. But what they do is pretty much take care of all the filtering and qualifying of the candidates, right? And now I just tell them I need this and this and this. And then what they do is they find the people, they source them, they filter them, and they just give me, okay, here are the 3 best candidates, right? And that makes my life way, way easier, right? But the other strategy that we are doing right now in our new office in La Paz is we actually have met with the 2 local universities, right? And then what we're working is a program sourcing talent from there, right? Like people that are about to graduate, but also a lot of internships, right? Obviously paid internships, right? But it's very important for us to get both very experienced and very new talent, right? So that's in general how we do it. And in terms of interviews, we have a process where we normally do 3 interviews, right? The first one is with the hiring manager. The second one is with the team, the direct team, right? And then the final one is with the rest of the company, right? And the reason why we do this last one is because we want to make sure that everyone agrees that this is not just a person that has already been qualified in the first 2 interviews, but that's someone that's actually going to be a very good fit to be a team member, right? Someone that you would love to work with, right? That you would like to have on your team. So that's in general how we work.
Thank you so much for that, Kuko. So Natalie asked a really great question. Natalie, if you'd like, we'd love to have you come on video and ask it to the group. Otherwise, I can just read it here for Kuko and share it with the group. But I'll wait five seconds maybe, and then I'll read it unless you'd like to join.
That's a good question, Natalie.
Yeah, it really, and I think we both can share some opinions on it. Oh, perfect. Natalie's joined. So here we go.
Hi.
Hi, Natalie. We can hear you.
Thank you for taking the time to come for this conference. As I said, so I'm currently a junior in college still, but I'm aspiring to start my own international company one day. And I was wondering what was one of the most difficult things starting out at the beginning stages of your company, and what inspired you all to start your own company in the first place?
So, Kuko, you could go first. I go first, whichever one.
You should go first, Ben. I've been talking for a while. You should go first.
No, I mean, you have good things to say. So, I spent just shy of 10 years working for big companies in quant finance, and I loved it. I did. It was fun. I had a blast. And one of the things I noticed at Goldman were some of our consumers were Latinos, and I saw firsthand in their data that they weren't getting the best utility at all the good products that we offered. I stood by the products that Marcus by Goldman Sachs offered. I thought they were really great products. I think people needed support in getting those tools be a little more accessible to them to be able to use them in a much more positive way than some places do. And it was a challenge, right? Just seeing that and wanting to help people. And I knew that my own experiences with finance, both my parents from Mexico, they didn't go to that much school. And so we didn't know much about finance. I didn't, when I first graduated college, I was just like, what's a loan, right? And what's a credit card? I didn't know anything about these things. And so, after learning about it, I realized that maybe I had some unique set of skills to be able to provide solutions. And then, it was a passion of mine. I couldn't give it up. And what I'd say is the hardest part that's been for it is probably turning away from it. It's like setting it down sometimes and separating, finding good life balance, right? Because all the statistics in the world about the Latino community and wealth and how COVID has impacted us relative to other communities. And so there's a gigantic stack of socioeconomic challenges amongst the Latino community. And so I can't help but think about it, right? from my research in graduate school to the work that I do now 10 years later, I obsess over it. And so if you're passionate about something and it just eats at you, I recommend doing it. But it's usually miserable. But I like miserable. So I don't know. And Google, I'd love for you to hear what you have to say.
It's two very interesting questions. So I'm going to start with what motivated us, I would say. So when both Rafa, my co-founder, and I were working at the last company, right? The first thing that motivated us to do it, even though we both always kind of had talked, like I always had told Rafa, like, you know what, at some point I want to have my own design agency and all this stuff. But what really motivated us, I think, was, and this is a funny story. We were working at Citrix, and for 1 year, we had been working on this project, on this big project, big campaign, big relaunch, right? And then right before launching, a new boss comes in and, another one leaves. And then I'll always, the new people always want to do, want to make sure that they do something so that people see that, now I'm here, right? So I'm doing things my way. So this guy decided to bring in a very good, and very well-known agency, right? One that we even obviously admired their work and everything, right? But what happened is these guys came in and then kind of massaged our work a little bit, and then just kind of like presented it as them, right? And then that was it, right? And they left after a month and a couple of $1 million. And we're like, dude, we can totally do this ourselves. Why the heck are we working for someone if we could, we could be making, that money? So that was the initial motivator, right? But I think an extra motivator, and I mean, this is personal, but I know that this is for Rafa, my co-founder, as well. It's just the example that we saw from our parents, right? Like both stories, right? Both our parents coming here young, work hard, then start their business, right? Gets to college, right? So it's obviously, at least for me personally, it's something that I feel like I have to do, right? Like it was at some point, it was not even an option. Like if my parents did it with nothing coming here, like I just have to do it, right? And the hard or the difficult things of when we started, I think starting is always hard because depending on what you do, but normally at the beginning, you don't see the money coming in, right? It normally takes time to start generating revenue, right? So for us, it was harder because it was like, we first had started like with the agency, and then when we pivoted to create our product, right? Then it was like, shit, we're not gonna be making any money, right? And then Rafa, my co-founder, he has a wife and kids and a mortgage, right? And I had student loans and all this shit. So we were working like literal all-nighters, right? Because instead of hiring another third person to help us, it was like, no, if we do it ourselves, then we can actually, keep most of the money, right? And then pay our bills and everything. So I think the hardest part is that you have to commit and you have to put those hours and you have to, no matter what, make it happen, right? And obviously, there's always going to be a balance, right? But to be honest, for at least personally, I don't think that if we from like, oh no, it's all about balance, that we could have made it, right? I feel like at the beginning, it's like, this is my dream and I'm going to do whatever it takes. If I don't sleep, I don't sleep. If I don't eat, I don't eat, right? There's always a point, like, we don't want you, to die of starvation, but, in general, I think it's that.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, thank you for that, Google. True words of wisdom. Natalie, the one other thing that I would say is that coming at it from having worked for a little bit of time, right? Helped me prepare for going into it. I felt like I developed a lot of institutional knowledge, connections with the right folks. So there's a different context of starting a company after working in an industry, right? In fact, I worked in my industry before starting that. It sounds like Google obviously did as well. Sometimes that helps make it a lot easier. That's not to say that you shouldn't do it, right? That's just to say sometimes there is a benefit to investing time and learning about the trade. You know, my dad's a mechanic. You know, he told me, Nico, you have to learn the skills first before you can play the game. And so I thought about that a lot for most of my life, and then going into it, right? So I tried to learn skills that would be very valuable to that. And so that's the kind of parting thing that I would say is just always balance, right? And that's not to say that you shouldn't jump right now and just go ahead and do it. And because there's really successful stories of people doing that. But you know, there are some benefits to both. And Google, if there's anything you'd like to add.
No, I think that's it. So I see another very good question.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Natalie.
Thanks, Natalie.
So the next question was from Senpan. And Google, how did you learn about the business side of things? You know, coming from a technology background. And
A very, very hard way. No, two things. Obviously, at the beginning, it was just, you know, we figure it out, right? We had to figure it out, right? Everything that had to do with, you know, creating proposals for a client, estimating, and like, you know, a lot of other things like that, we just had to learn it, right? And we kind of learn it, obviously, you know, like a lot of people by making mistakes and by, you know, but one smart thing I think we did that is related to that is we realized that we needed to bring in people that would add to what we didn't have, right? So we actually, after a year and a half, we got a new partner, right? A new business partner, Jen, who actually used to work with us in Citrix, right? And she was running a marketing department there, right? So we brought her as CMO, right? And she's the one who has more experience on the business side and also on the commercial side, right? Which is something that we obviously it was not our strong suit, right? So I think yes, it's very important to you know. What you're asking in terms of like an MBA, I'm not so sure, right? Depends on what your background is and everything, right?
So, Google, if you don't mind, I can share some opinions about the MBA thing. So, you know, sure. Working at some of the financial institutions that I spent some time at, you know, MBAs tended to be quite frequent, you know, especially from the top schools, right? And what I will say is, you know, to Kuko's point, it does vary quite a bit by industry, right? You know, it depends on the company that you're working at, whether an MBA is going to be effective. It also depends on the school, right? And there's a lot of network effects that end up coming out of MBA. So if you're at a place like Stanford or Harvard, which, you know, are really challenging institutions to get into, the set of options that you get leaving those is very high, right? You can go work at a bunch of different jobs, and it's not necessarily just because you went to Stanford or Harvard or whatever, but it ends up being in part because the connections you make there. So MBAs do a really good job at helping you maybe pivot careers and getting introductions into firms that are really helpful. Now, that said, if you're still going to some of the other really, really great schools that are not Harvard or Stanford, right? They still end up being net positive, but they are very expensive. And so I've met people that are very, very successful without MBAs from top schools or from any school. On average, people that are in, you know, very senior executive positions at different banks tend to have a graduate degree, maybe an MBA, maybe a JD, or maybe something else from some of those institutions. So sometimes it's a mixed effect, right? I personally tend to recommend people to go to school. I have a bias towards it, you know, but I would say that first set where your goal is and then figure out if an MBA can help you get there faster, and that net present value over the lifetime, if it ends up being positive. My suspicion is that it usually tends to be if it's on the upper end of a school. Now, if you go to Trump University, it might be a little bit more of a challenge to get high yield from that degree, but that's not a criticism of that school. It's just, I look at it from a data perspective, right? So, Google, do you have any other additional wisdom?
Yeah. So going back to what you said about making connections, I think that's even within this community, right, where Techqueria is all about accessibility for a community and all this stuff, right, and trying to make sure that things like opportunities don't happen to only people who have certain connections and all this stuff. Even within us, the truth is connections are very important, right? And having a network, a local network that you can grow and expand is very important, right? I don't think we would have never been able to grow our company in these 4 years the way that we've done it, if it wasn't because all the different connections and relationships that we made over the years, right? And this is both from being in a place where, of course, a lot of the people that I met here were just in this industry, right? Which made it easy, definitely, right? But the cool thing now is, and it's probably one of the only positive things of this pandemic is, what used to be so exclusive of Silicon Valley, these connections there's up now, is just like way more wide open. I was just talking to one of our investors, and he used to literally travel. Like he didn't have an apartment or a home base, right? He was always traveling all throughout Latin America and the US, because they have a fund here that invests in Latin American companies. And he was telling me how now he has not left home in 6 months, and he's like, I'm meeting with entrepreneurs everywhere, right? I don't care if they're in California or they're Silicon Valley, or if they're in Santiago or Lima or Bogota, right? So, but in general, networking, I would say it's really important too.
And with those incredible words of wisdom, thank you so much, Kuko. Thank you so much, Techqueria. Thank you so much, everybody who came here for the talk. We really appreciate it. I know I certainly do. Kuko, any other parting words or thoughts?
No, I mean, let me just put my email again, just in case anyone has any further questions or whatever. If there are any insights that I can give you or any advice, I'm totally available. And thank you so much for your time and just for letting us tell our stories.
Thank you, everyone. And I'll add Kuko's and my email there. Please feel free to reach out to us. Any questions?
Oh, yeah. I could have literally just typed it. All right.
That's all right. I typed it for you. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely week. And we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Adios.